Well, we've had 30 seconds. Jackie, will Andrew give me a message?
No, it's okay to start now, Chair.
Okay to start the meeting. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this remote meeting of the Audit Committee on this Monday, the 29th of June. I'm Councillor Ed Bell, Chairman of the Committee. Please note that this meeting is recorded live to the Council's website and will be available to be viewed for a minimum of 6 months. I would like to give you a warm welcome to the members, officers and any members of the public or media who are watching this live feed of the meeting. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I would like to cover some basic housekeeping issues for all of us to follow in order for the meeting to run as smoothly as possible. Please bear with us as this is new to us all. Only speak when invited to by myself as chair. Keep your microphone on mute. If you do not wish to speak, or if you do wish to speak, type RTS. Once you're invited to speak, please introduce yourself with your name and position unless you have already introduced yourself earlier in the meeting. Should I lose connection, please note that Councillor James Lawrenson, Vice Chair, will take over in my absence until connection is restored. We're now going into the minutes of the meeting and we'll go to item 1, and the first agenda item is apologies for absence. Can I ask Jackie if there are any apologies received, please?
Thanks, Chair. We have apologies from Councillors Colin Carr and from Councillor John Robinson.
Thank you. Can I ask members if there are any declarations of interest? That's a negative. That's nobody. Okay, thank you. Item 3. Minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of February. These begin on page 3 of our papers. Before I ask if anyone has any comments, can I ask Mazars about item 8 on page 5? Mazars were to provide an update on housing benefit subsidy assurance. Can James Collins or Mark Kirkham please provide an update for us?
Yes, Chair, I can provide an update on that. The work is. Sorry, Chair, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Can you just introduce yourself, James?
Of course, yes. I'm James Collins, Audit Manager for Mazar. Just an update on the housing benefits subsidy work is now complete and was submitted to the deadline set by the DWP.
Okay. Has anybody else got any items to raise from the minutes? Okay, thank you. Is there a mover of the minutes?
I'll move the minutes, Chairman.
And is there a seconder?
I second the minutes, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Owen Temple.
Thank you. Thanks, Owen. Item 4 is the Corbett risk register. And I think John Hewitt, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. John Hewitt, Corporate Director of Resources for the Council. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes picking up the highlights of the COVID-19 risk register, which the Council's had in place since the outbreak of COVID-19, and just talk members through the process for the management of risk during COVID-19, and just give members some assurance that there is a process in place set out in the report in terms of the way that COVID-19 risk is being managed. So just in terms of how we've approached this at the outset of COVID-19, a number of governance groups were set up by the Council, as you would expect, to deal with the response element of the crisis. Our risk team worked with those groups to establish a baseline of COVID-19 risks. That work started very quickly to assess those risks, working with the chairs of those particular groups. It is important for the committee to note that that work, although it started when the outbreak was underway, that work has continued and is continuing as we work through our continued response, but also importantly will continue as we move through the recovery phase, hopefully over the coming weeks and months, Chair. Given the nature of what we're dealing with, the COVID-19 risk register will be evolving. It will be evolving quickly, and there is a note in the report to set that out. As you would expect, these risks are going to change quite frequently. So what you see in front of you is the risk register at the point it was written. So I'm just making that point, Chair, just in terms of the information that's in front of members. The risks in the risk register will be reviewed and aligned to the strategic risk register, and you'll note if you look at the report and the appendices, this is very much the COVID-19 risks and risk register that we've set out for members of the committee, just to give you that assurance that the process is in place. This is effectively being used as a live document by members of staff that are chairing groups and involved in the groups that are leading on the COVID response. The report today is to provide Audit Committee with that assurance that there is a process in place for COVID-19, and hopefully the report sets that out for members. In terms of the risks themselves, at the time of writing the report, they're set out in Appendix 2. We've tried to set that out in a helpful way in terms of a heat map, so you can see those risks which are higher scored than others, and those that are above the risk appetite. And Appendix 2 shows the main risks on one page for members' information, but please do bear in mind they will change potentially from day to day depending on what happens next with COVID-19. Chair, just to finish, Appendix 3 gives a breakdown of the risks in more detail in terms of what's included on the heat map. So quite a comprehensive report, Chair. It's there to give members of the Audit Committee the assurance that risks are being assessed and monitored on a regular basis, and we have set out the current, or the position at the time the report was written, list of COVID-19 risks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Have any members got any observations or any questions on that?
Happy to move the report, Chairman.
Clive, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Clive Robinson, the independent members supporting the Council of the Audit Committee. Thanks, John, for the detail and for bringing us through, and thanks for the team for putting that together. It was important that you mentioned about this was the net risk as at the time that the detail was put together. I suppose my question is just how do we get assurance around at what point we're going to accept these risks? Because obviously there'll be actions against them. There are a number of risks that have high probability, and whilst I agree, the actions will be developing and ongoing. I suppose, and I don't want to go through in detail, but are we looking at remediation action plans, or is it an acceptance strategy for some of these? Can you maybe just give us a bit of feel for how the responses around mitigating those is going?
Yeah, if I can, thanks for the question, Clive. In terms of those risks that are listed, they are changing regularly, and that a lot of that is to do with the fact that we are trying to take remediating action, so looking at different controls, different processes. I think the one thing I would say, some of these are more difficult to control than others. So, for example, where some of those risks are sort of central government led in terms of some of the things that we need to happen to impact on the risk, that's less within our control. So we're then looking at sort of strategies for managing those risks. Where it's more within our direct control, we are trying to put processes in place to mitigate against the risk and the risk score that's in the risk register. So just to give the committee some assurance on that, as I said, these are reviewed regularly through the groups that we've got in place. The ones that are in front of you today, where we can, we are trying to come up with mitigating actions. I would say it's a very, very fast-paced environment that we're working in, and things do change day to day, but we are focused on mitigating those risks. And as government do roll out new policies and procedures, that will also help assist us to address some of the risks that are on the report. So I suspect next time this report comes to the committee, there are likely to be some different risks on there. Some of them will have been closed down, some of them will have reduced in score, but there may well be some higher scoring risks that aren't on there at the minute as we move into different phases of the pandemic and potentially into recovery.
Thank you, John. Are you all right with that, Clive?
Yes, that's fine, and I appreciate it will be an ongoing process. But so it was just to try and understand how we were going to be bringing this down within appetite, as John had identified. So thanks for that.
Can I bring in Councillor Owen Temple, please. Owen?
Councillor Owen Temple, yeah, thank you, Chair. John, you've mentioned that there are some things we don't have much control over, and two of the really big financial ones for this council, I guess, are council tax benefit and business rates. And what I was wondering was, do you have any early indications at the moment? I think business rates might not yet be apparent, but I would guess on the council tax benefit, there must be some trend emerging. And I wondered if you could give us any steer on what you're seeing to date.
Yeah, I'll give you some headlines, Councillor Temple. Thanks for the question. And you're right, that is a potentially big impact for the council. Interestingly, on business rates collection is pretty much tracking what it was last year. And the reason for that is because the government implemented a lot of reliefs for the retail and hospitality side of business rates. So we're actually seeing business rates just about tracking the performance for last year. So not yet seeing that come through. I do have a concern we could see that worsen as potentially furlough ends and companies either do or don't come back. So that is a risk that we need to keep an eye on. Council tax is tracking around about 0.7% below last year's figures. That would result, if that continued at that level, and again this could worsen depending on what happens with the virus. That will potentially result in a collection fund impact of somewhere between £4 and £6 million. But there are lots of variables at play with that. So that's a headline figure. It won't end up being that figure. I'm just giving you a likely indication of what that number might look like. The caveat to all that is, as the stages of the pandemic change and we move through sort of response and into recovery, we really probably aren't going to know until later this year, Councillor Temple, what those numbers look like. But that's where we are at the minute in terms of the sort of wider numbers, just to give you a headline set of figures on business rates and council tax.
Thank you, that's helpful, Chair.
Thanks very much, Owen. No more questions? Got none. Can I ask members happy to note the report as per the recommendations from John? We agreed? Yeah.
Agreed.
Can we move on to item 5, which is the Q4 health and safety wellbeing? And I think this is Kevin Lough who's going to take this report.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Kevin. Can you just introduce yourself, Kevin?
Yeah, it's Kevin Lough, Durham County Council Occupational Health and Safety Manager.
Thank you. Off you go, Kevin.
Okay, so just take you through the headlines for the Q4 Health, Safety and Wellbeing Performance Report. Just like to highlight, there's some businesses normal information in here. Obviously, this was Q4, so it was the back end of Q4 when the COVID-19 pandemic really hit the council. So a lot of this stuff will be, like I said, business as usual items and information. In terms of accidents during the quarter, on page 2 of the report, we had 379 accidents, near misses, which is very in line with the rest of the quarters for 2019-20. So there was no outlying statistics there. There's details in the report about the main accident causes, which remain slip, trips, falls, moving and handling, violence and aggression. So there again, previous to similar to previous quarters. There was no significant accidents in terms of RIDDOR reportable accidents. We had 4 fire-related incidents, which I'll cover in the main body of the report. And very positively, the council, which is really appropriate in terms of some of the COVID-related challenges we've had across the council, we're progressing with the Better Health at Work Continuing Excellence Award, which is a lot of that is focused on physical and mental health and well-being, which, you know, we're doing an awful lot of work around, particularly at the moment, supporting our employees during these challenging times. So some really good statistics and work during the quarter again. In terms of joint inspections with the trade unions, obviously working very closely with the trade unions, as we always do. There was 6 joint inspections with trade union employee safety representatives across the council. Again, proving to be really positive in terms of working with trade unions and employees, ensuring standards are in place. There was a high number of fire safety internal audits undertaken, 31 in total across a range of council settings on a risk priority basis, which was again showed some good assurance levels for the council in terms of fire safety management. And there was 4 fire-related incidents, nothing of any significance in terms of damage or injuries to employees or members of the public. And they were at a school, an extra care scheme, and the Riverside Sports Complex in Chesley Street. County Durham Dalton Fire and Rescue Service, so we remain working very closely with. There was 3 fire and rescue service inspections or external inspections of council premises. And again, they were undertaken at schools and some of our industrial estates at Stella Gill. There was no prosecutions, prohibition or improvement notices served by any enforcing authorities during the quarter. Health and safety inspectors did visit one of our primary schools at West Pelton, and that was to look at and analyse our asbestos management arrangements in the council, and they took that as an evidence-based visit in terms of how we manage that. And the HSC inspectors were very complimentary about the manner in which it was managed at that particular school, but also other schools across the county. So we've got some really good feedback from the health and safety executive on that. In terms of occupational health, we had nearly 300 employees participate in clinical consultations during the period, and 118 attended statutory health surveillance. And there's some detail in the report there about numbers in terms of other activities in terms of occupational health. In terms of open water safety across the county, it was again positive report. There was no water related incidents in the city centre or during the quarter. There was one reported fatal incident involving open water, and that was at Bishop Auckland. The police have referred that particular case to the coroner, but there was no suspicious circumstances there. And again, we're doing lots of work in the coastline with the RNLI to ensure our risk assessments are up to date there. Our annual cold water shock awareness campaign, which was due to take place during Q1, obviously has been impacted significantly due to COVID-19. But what we have done is took some alternative approaches to deliver some water safety messages during the July and June period. So again, that's really important because we know, as the lockdowns have been eased, there's a lot of young people congregating near waterways, rivers, etc. So we have took alternative approaches. We've done some heavy social media work, and we're also working across the county on individual sites to put up awareness messages and posters, etc. So there's still work ongoing, even though we can't deliver some of the assemblies we usually deliver in schools. Employee health and wellbeing, mental health and wellbeing. We've renewed our contract with our employee assistance program provider, Health Assured, who've done some great work with us, and we're really trying to push and promote that throughout Q4, but also particularly during Q1, which has been a challenging time for some of our employees. But we've got a suite of support measures out there and a range of support measures which we're actually trying to get employees and managers to access and utilise where appropriate. So again, a lot of work going on in terms of mental health and wellbeing across the council. In terms of our PVPR register, the statistics there on page 7 and 8 of the report, and as normal there on page 8, that shows our corporate risks in terms of health and safety as of writing the report. And I think that's that's all the headlines, Chair.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I've got one question tabled from Councillor June Clark. Can you introduce yourself, Joan? And it's on paragraph 30.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor June Clark, member of the Audit Committee. I noticed in your report that this is a new area the council are moving into, and I just wondered if you could give us a brief overview, Kevin, please, of the areas that you look at. In a risk assessment. I'm sure they may change depending on the location, but if you can just give us a brief update on what it is that you're covering in the risk assessment for the coastal areas, please.
Yeah, so we, as a council, the RNLI take the lead for those risk assessments, but we work closely with them on that. So the RNLI will look at things like positioning of lifeguards and along the coastal areas, if there are any there. They'll look at access to beaches, such as car parks and walkways to beaches. They'll look at the footfall numbers on those beach areas. They'll also look at highly populated areas near to the coastal areas or beaches. They'll look at things like antisocial behaviour in terms of any youths or young people in terms of in those coastal areas. They'll also look at the proximity of schools, and that there's a number of risk factors and sort of accessibility to beaches, things like piers. Tombstoning is a particularly popular but nevertheless dangerous activity in some coastal areas. So there's a whole range of aspects that they'll look at and factors to look at the risk assessments. Public rescue equipment such as life rings and other things like that. The ability to raise alarm with emergency services as well. So there's any mobile black spots, for example. So there is an awful lot goes into these risk assessments. But like as I say, the RNLI tend to lead those at the coastal areas, but we're looking at making sure those risks are managed appropriately.
Thanks for that, Chair, and thank you, Kevin. Is there somewhere where we can actually locate those risk assessments to see what's actually recorded on them, please? Yeah,
certainly we can get, once they've been updated by RNLI, we'll certainly look at providing those, and yeah, you can have access to some of the risk assessment factors and what the outcomes have been.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Kevin. Obviously, I'm like June, over on the coast, and we've had lots and lots of antisocial problems, especially on the beach and that. Can you give us any kind of update? Because I think you said if there's any coastal people there, perhaps they might not be there. And do we have a responsibility as County Council to patrol the beaches? And we need some more reassurance about what is happening in that area, because that's the questions I'm getting asked over on the coast.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're aware of some of the issue on challenging spots along the coastal area. So obviously working with the neighbourhood policing teams is a really important part of that. They've got quite a lot of intelligence already where some of the antisocial behaviour is happening, but also things like our neighbourhood warden service as well. We can utilise and look to do that. We're doing work with through our sort of water safety campaigns. We are looking at schools, and I've done some work previously, and we'll continue to do that as any schools in the vicinity of the coastal area, to try and get some messages out to teachers and the pupils themselves directly in terms of the risks associated with that. And we do cover some of the things like tombstoning, for example, which is a highly dangerous activity, but nevertheless quite popular with young people. So there's a range of interventions we would look at in terms of that. But when antisocial behaviour, absolutely, the local neighbourhood policing teams and our warden service, for example, play a pivotal role in that.
Right, thanks, Kevin. I think all members would be appreciative of some kind of update and information. Thanks.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, can I ask members if they're happy to note the report? We all agreed? Thank you. Can we move on to item 6, which is the internal audit progress report? And I think Paul Monaghan, you were taking this. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm Paul Monaghan, Audit Manager for Durham County Council. So this is the end of year progress report for 2019-20. The table in paragraph 8 shows the progress made against the plan. The detail of that's in Appendix 2. Paragraph 10 sets out that 98% of the planned days have been completed, which is above the target. The changes to the plan in the period are shown in the tables in 11 and 12, with many of the audits that were added being as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and our service having to realign our resources. Then the table in paragraph 14 shows the survey response rate of 79%, and they had an average score of 4.6 out of 5. A summary of the status of the actions is included in paragraph 16. So there was 41 actions not implemented by their original target date, with 6 of these not having revised dates set. However, these 6 actions were not chased due to the situation with COVID-19 and services having other priorities at that time. Details of the 41 actions are shown in Appendix 6, which is included in Part B. Paragraph 20 shows that there was no audits issued in the quarter with a limited assurance opinion. So finally, members are asked to note the 4 recommendations in paragraph 4. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. John, I understand that you want to speak in this.
Yeah, sorry, John.
Can you introduce yourself, John?
I've got some Councillor John Shuttleworth. I've got technical problems. I've had to push the place your hand. Just in Appendix 2, it makes there's an item regarding the review internal controls at Beamish, and I just wondered, given the recent press articles, what exactly what procedure we are going to put in place there.
Are we okay to talk about Beamish?
Is it okay if I come in on this, please, Chair?
I think yes.
Hi,
Paul.
Hi everyone. Morning. Paul Bradley, Chief Internal Auditor and Corporate Fraud Manager for Durham County Council. Thanks, John, for the question. We have detailed that we've done that work, John, but I can't discuss Beamish Museum in this committee because it's one of my clients, and that work has been at the request of my client, being Beamish Museum, and that work, the outcome of that work has been discussed with them.
I understand that, but we have 3 members on the board of Beamish Museum Limited. And I just thought, even if it's in Part B, I think members should have an overview at some point in the future, if not sooner,
Chair, it's John.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Chair.
Yeah.
Can I suggest we pick that up outside the meeting as a separate issue, Chair, please?
Are you happy with that, John?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Paul, are you finished with your report?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Chair?
Oh, yeah. Sir? Who's that?
Chair.
Oh, yes, Owen, I've just seen you. Thank you.
Hello, sorry, was that me?
Yes, that's you, Owen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Owen Temple again. Chair, I realise that this report was written for March 31st, and at that point we were only, 2 weeks into lockdown. But I think it would be helpful for the committee if we could have some kind of indication of what has been happening in internal audit in the period since then, i.e. have people been redeployed because it's impossible to do the work from home, or are they able to do the work from home? What kind of, now, I just feel that, it would be useful for the committee to understand what is and isn't possible in internal audit at the moment.
Again, Chair.
Paul Bradley.
Can I come in on that? Thanks, Owen. I think the COVID-19 lockdown situation for internal audit probably didn't come as much of an impact to our service as possibly others has. Our service has been working agile or remotely for the best part of the last 2 years. So people have been working from home, working from other offices and various other locations for the last 2 years. So having to work from home 5 days a week hasn't made that much of an impact. It's impacted more on the services that we are visiting or that we are auditing. To be honest, in the first 2 weeks of lockdown, that was I think services were getting to grips with the new normal kind of thing. So in those first 2 weeks, we were kind of reassessing what work we could do. Clearly, we couldn't go and audit leisure centres, for example, because they were shut. And various other establishments like that where we would have to be on site. We've had to pull that back ever so slightly. However, and I will touch on this later in the agenda in the internal audit plan, we've adjusted the internal audit plan for 2020-2021 as new things have kind of come along in terms of the COVID-19 response. Procurement has been changed. Payments to business, the business rates grants have all been paid out. These are things that the audit team now need to get involved with. So where we weren't involved on a site, we've been able to do that work quite easily remotely. So it's just a case of speaking to clients via Teams, getting information electronically, which is what we've been doing pretty much prior to the lockdown. So in terms of how internal audit work, I think we've pretty much kept going all the way through. I will say 2 of my officers were redeployed, Councillor Temple, into commissioning because they were short of staff at the time, and we wanted to kind of help out, and we did have that resource available to send there. And they're now back. They only spent 6 weeks with commissioning. They're now back, and we're now working at full steam ahead with all of our client base. So it's all from an audit perspective, we haven't had that much interruption.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got no more questions on this matter. Can I ask members happy to accept the recommendations in paragraph 4?
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Can we move on to item 7, which is consideration of going concern status for the statement of accounts for the year ended the 31st of March. Can I ask Beverly White to introduce herself and to present this report, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'm Beverly White. I'm a Finance Manager in Resources with responsibility for revenue, pensions and technical accounting. So this report starts on page 53 of the pack. Every year we need to assess whether the Council can be considered as a going concern organisation and whether it is correct to prepare the annual statement of accounts on that basis. This report provides information to be considered in this assessment and recommends that members of this committee approve the Council should be considered as a going concern. We compile the annual statement of accounts in accordance with the latest CIPFA Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting, and this code requires that our accounts are prepared on a going concern basis on the assumption that the Council will continue in operational existence for the foreseeable future. Although we know some organisations are starting to report financial difficulties, it still would be unusual for a local authority to have a going concern problem. Now, the main reasons for this are that local authorities carry out functions essential to local communities. They are revenue-raising bodies. They derive their powers from statute and within the financing framework closely monitored by legislation. And if a local authority were in financial difficulty, alternative arrangements should be put in place by central government. Nevertheless, we have to consider the Council's financial performance to assess our ability to continue as a going concern. So this report takes a look back at the Council's historical position and sets out the net asset values over the last 5 years, and mentions that robust annual assessments carried out by external auditors in previous years have reported no cause for concern. The report looks at the current financial position and demonstrates that the balance sheet and the level of reserves still remain healthy. And it also provides information on the likely future financial position of the Council. And yeah, we know the financial landscape is going to be challenging for us. The outcome of the comprehensive spending review and the fair funding review are unknown at this stage, and the uncertainty brought about by the impact of Brexit and more recently COVID-19 adds to that pressure. However, the Council does have a robust financial standing with sound financial management processes in place. The balanced budget for 2020-21 and the medium-term financial plan taking us up to 2023-24 were approved by full Council back in February 2020. And the budget will be reviewed and updated next month as we prepare the Q1 forecast of outturn position for 2021. And as normally the case, this will closely be monitored throughout the year. So for the reasons set out in this report, it's recommended that members agree that the Council is considered as a going concern and the accounts are correctly prepared on a going concern basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Beverly. I've got nobody requesting to speak, so I'll go straight into the recommendations that the Council is considered as a going concern and the statement of accounts prepared on this basis. Wait a minute, I've just got Ian come in. Ian Rudd?
Oh, hello, Chair. This is Ian Rudd, co-opted member. I was just looking at paragraph 40, where it gives 3 options for for the going concern. One is that it's clearly a going concern. Option B is the body is a going concern, but there are uncertainties regarding future issues. Or the third one, the body is not a going concern. So the question is, are we being asked to approve 40A or 40B? Is it clearly a going concern, or is it a going concern but there are uncertainties? So that's a question for Beverly, I think.
Beverly, would you like to reply to that?
It is that we are clearly a going concern.
That's option A.
Yes.
Thanks, Ian.
Right.
Have you got any comeback questions on that?
Well, just that there do seem to be a lot of uncertainties listed there, but presumably the view is that they are not sufficiently uncertain to merit being mentioned in the accounts.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendations and report are there. Do we agree those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we move on to item 8, which is the annual review of the system of internal audit? And I think Paul Bradley is going to take this.
Thank you, Chair. Morning again, everyone. Just for the record, I'm Paul Bradley, the Chief Internal Auditor and Corporate Fraud Manager for Durham County Council. This report presents members with the annual review of the system of internal audit for 2019-2020. As the report sets out how the review has been conducted, and this includes looking at, firstly, the structure and resourcing level, including the qualifications and experience of the audit team. This is set out in detail in paragraphs 14 through 27 of the report. The review found that the structure, resourcing levels, qualifications and experience of the team are satisfactory. Secondly, the service has been self-assessed against the key elements of the public sector internal audit standards. The details of the review are set out in paragraphs 28 through 31 of the report, and the review demonstrates that the service is conforming with the requirements of the code. The service is externally assessed every 5 years. We were last assessed in 2016, so the next external assessment will be due in 2021. However, I do know that some councils and services are being put back an extra year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of ensuring audit work was successfully delivered in the most appropriate areas on a prioritised risk basis, it's considered that the 2019-2020 internal audit plan represented a reasonable view of critical areas for audit review, and more detail is set out in paragraphs 32 through 34 of the report. Lastly, the overall performance of the internal audit service is reviewed. The service's key performance indicators are set out at paragraph 37 of the report, and the service is performing well in all areas. Some thoughts are required on getting school draft audit reports out in a more timely manner without compromising the quality of those reports, but that's something that the service is looking at. But overall, the service continues to build on its strengths and enhance its reputation. I think this is reflected in the increasing client base that the service is representing, and the requests for work across the council as well, which is also good. The service has delivered a comprehensive plan for the year, and it has a sound base for continuing audit activity and meeting its objectives to provide assurance and advice to support the council. Members are asked to note the findings and conclusions of the 2019-20 review of the effectiveness of the system of internal audit. But I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
I've got no questions down. Do we note the report by Paul Bradley? Do you agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can I move on to item 9, protecting the public purse? And I think again, Paul Bradley, you're going to take this.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents members with the annual Protecting the Public Purse report. I'll just pick out some of the highlights of the report. Just to let you know, the corporate fraud team have been involved in a wide range of activity across the year. There's been a continued fraud awareness campaign throughout the year. That's across the county council as a whole. In terms of performance, the team has recovered or intercepted over £3.5 million worth of fraud. The largest area in the year has been the prevention of right to buy fraud, and that's been working with the county's registered social landlords. Details of this are all illustrated in Appendix 2 of the report. The team have been recognised nationally. They were shortlisted for Fraud Team of the Year with the Institute of Revenue's Ratings and Valuations. And again, they've been shortlisted for the Fighting Fraud Locally Award, with the results expected for that one in October. There is a plan in place for work across 2020-2021. That's illustrated in Appendix 3. And finally, the service has been heavily involved in helping develop the National Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally Strategy document, which is presented to members in Appendix 4. Members are asked to note all of the aspects of the annual Protecting the Public Purse Report 2019-2020. Again, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Have members got any questions? Well, I would just like again to pass on our thanks to Steve Graham and his team, and I would hope that you can do that in a very nice way, Paul. You know, they've done very well.
Will do, Chair. Thank you. Can I move on to item 10, which is the Chair, annual... There is a question.
Oh, one just popped up. Thank you, Ian.
Oh, hello there. Just a question for Paul. I was looking at Appendix 2, and it gives data for the different types of fraud. And one of them was procurement, where there'd been 4 frauds with a value of about £85,000. But I was comparing that to the national data on page 109, where the procurement fraud was actually much higher as a percentage. So I was just wondering what the significance of the lower figure in the Durham area was. Is it just that we've got better controls?
I would like to say that we have better controls. I would hope that we do. I think what I would also say, Ian, is that we've discussed this with CIPFRA, and we've also discussed this with the Home Office around how different councils report procurement fraud and whether we're actually comparing apples with apples, so to speak, because sometimes another authority will register something as procurement fraud that we maybe have badged as something totally different. So what we're working with CIPFRA and other colleagues is around getting a classification that's consistent across all authorities, so we can literally compare each other in a bit more of a joined up way. So whilst one report might say that procurement's quite heavy in one area in one council and what looks quite light in another, it may just simply be because the classification from each authority has been different.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. That's quite an interesting question. Something I'm sure we need to take up. Otherwise, we're going to get some false figures somewhere along the line. So I'm just wondering, have our outside external auditors got any views on that part? James, have you got any views on that? Is that something that you'd be interested in or not?
I mean, we'd obviously be interested, Chair, from the audit perspective, but also from the value for money side of our work. But it's not an area that we've got any particular comparable data at this stage. But we certainly can look into it if that would help.
Yeah, it just seems that if we're comparing like for like, then it should be like for like. Okay, thanks very much, James. Thanks, Ian. Thanks for your question. Do we accept that report from Paul? That's a yes. Thank you. Item 10. Are you taking this again? Annual audit opinion. And Paul Bradley, you're going to take this item?
Thank you, Chair. This report presents members with my annual internal audit opinion and report for 2019-2020. The public sector internal audit standards require that the Chief Auditor Executive provides an annual internal audit opinion based on an objective assessment of the framework of governance, risk management and control. Based on the work of internal audit during the year, I'm able to provide a moderate overall assurance opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of internal control, governance and risk management across the Council in 2019-2020. Now, Normally, I would say there were no issues that would qualify that opinion. However, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, my opinion is qualified due to its impact on the council. The opinion that I've given is based on the internal audit work that was completed prior to emergency measures having been implemented as a result of the pandemic and lockdown. These measures have resulted in a significant level of strain being placed on normal procedures and the control arrangements. The level of impact is changing as the situation develops, so it's not currently possible to quantify the additional risk from the short-term measures or the overall impact on the framework of governance, risk management and control that have been put in place. The 2020-2021 internal audit plan has been changed to reflect the COVID-19 impacts across the organisation. Away from COVID-19, the moderate opinion provides assurance that there is a sound system of control in place. However, there have been some weaknesses and evidence of ineffective controls across the year. The service is providing advice across a range of council projects, including the replacement IT systems across children's and adult services. Further work is required in 2020-2021 on the effectiveness of the council's company governance. This has been referenced in the annual governance statement as an improvement. And I'm currently sat on a cross-service group looking at the issue about providing advice in this area. My annual report is presented in Appendix 2, which gives the detail of the work that we've completed and how it's been completed throughout the year. Members are therefore asked to note the content of the annual internal audit report 2019-20 in Appendix 2 and note the overall moderate assurance opinion provided on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's internal control environment for 2019-20 with the general qualification that I have mentioned. I'm happy to take any questions on the report, Chair.
Thanks. I've got an indication from Clive that you would like to ask, have a query.
Thank you, Chair. Clive Robinson, co-opted member of the Audit Committee. Paul, thanks very much for the report and the detail in that. And just to keep on top of a general theme that's been coming through over recent years is that the control framework seems to be largely robust. However, the challenge we have in terms of getting an effective system of control is on the ability of the teams and the individuals across the authority to actually comply with policies and procedures and execute those controls on an ongoing basis. So my concern is if we can't get people to exercise those responsibilities whilst they're working within the office, within systems and procedures and the governance that they would normally have, are we hugely exposed now that they're working remotely and aren't subject to the same sort of supervision and oversight that they otherwise would have?
I'll come back in on that, please, Chair. Thanks,
yes, please.
Thanks, Clive. I would hope we're not hugely exposed, Clive. I think it's certainly a risk, though, and it's a risk that I've identified, and it's something that, whilst obviously lockdown came 2 weeks before the financial year end, the majority of our work had already been completed for 2019-20 at that point. I think what I'm conscious of is that I think we need to do quite a large amount of testing over this next 6 months to almost 12 months to come back and give you the assurance that everything has worked and the controls have remained in place. I think I hear what you're saying is that, yeah, during the year we've had issues where compliance has been an issue in terms of with policies and procedures, and obviously when people are now working remotely with what could be perceived as a lesser management supervision, having been working from home, being in place, I'm assured kind of that the Teams process that we're using is working. I think managers have really bought into that, and so have the staff. So I'm hoping that the control environment isn't hugely at risk. There is obviously a risk, but I'd like to do some testing on that, certainly during the next 6 months, to give myself and yourselves the assurance that things are working the way that they should be.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. So I suppose what I would just say is that would be an area I would like to focus on going forward, because, as I say, it's not just this year. I think it's historically we've been identifying that it's the ability to actually operate the controls that we already have in place that have led to the less than full opinion that you've been able to offer. So I'll certainly look with interest to see what the nature of the opinions are on the reports that we get at the end of the next quarter, because it just unfortunately seems to be a running theme that it's the ability to operate those controls that is the biggest risk at the moment.
Thank you, Clive. I've got Owen Temple wanting to come in, and I've got Mark, I think, wanting to come in after that. So I'll bring Owen in if that's okay.
Chair, thank you. Clive's been talking about kind of controls, as it were, going forward. I'm wondering about the fact that we had a very sudden influx of money and a requirement to get it out quickly because of COVID. So we received quite a lot of money from government, which had to be passed on to businesses, which was done with great alacrity. And I think we were well ahead of the game in terms of getting it out quickly. But with speed comes the risk that ordinary controls may have to be suspended almost, or certainly relaxed. And also on a more local level, we've had money being provided to things like area action partnerships to get out into the community quickly. And so again, you know, the kind of funding controls have necessarily had to be, I think, actively relaxed rather than just it's kind of happened. So in the light of that, my question is really, will you be expecting to do a historic review to look back, you know, as part of the whole value for money thing? Did we get value for this money? Because my suspicion would be we would have got less value for money spent quickly, but still necessary. But I'm just wondering what action, you know, what kind of approach you're planning to take to that. Will it be a historical review? Or would you say you don't actually think we did suspend or relax any controls? Because I suspect we might find that there has been some leakage of money in the process.
Thanks, Owen, for the question. Again, yes, there's now work in the internal audit plan for 2020-2021 to cover off the business grants, the AAP community funding, all of the money, as you quite rightly say, it had to go out at speed, and with speed comes risk. At the time that the money was going out, I was consulted by Paul Darby as the head of finance and transactional services as that money was kind of going out, and he did, you know, illustrate to me what controls were in place. But then to give me that assurance that you've touched on pretty much all of the areas that the questions that I asked Paul at the time was, these are the things that I want to come back and do a historical review of. But also what we've got in place as well, Owen, is the fraud team are now, the corporate fraud team are working proactively with Lloyds Bank, with the Cabinet Office, with the National Fraud Initiative, and with Experian and people like that, about as people are putting those grant claims in, we can pretty much run some proactive checks before that money, or just as that money kind of goes out, and we can stop money if we think there's a question or a query that needs to be answered before that money goes into the relevant bank account. We can come across that and put a stop on that very quickly.
So in terms of, you're saying there will be a historic review which will eventually come back to this committee. That's good, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Owen. I think I've got Mark wanting to speak. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mark Kirkham, External
Can you introduce yourself, Mark?
Thank you. Mark Kirkham, External Audit. And my question is about the weaknesses that the Chief Internal Auditor says that stem from evidence of ineffective controls. And I was I'm wondering if the Chief Internal Auditor has a view on the numbers that are about to be considered by the Audit Committee at item 13 in the Statement of Accounts. So Chief Internal Auditor's report says there's evidence of weaknesses, and members will be asked shortly to consider the impact of those weaknesses on the account. So it might be useful to get the Chief Internal Auditor's view on that now, if that's helpful.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I can confirm that the weaknesses in control have not got any kind of material impact on the Statement of Accounts. There's been nothing there that the committee need to kind of worry about in terms of approving the statement. There's nothing there that I would consider to have impacted those figures at all.
Bev, are you going to comment?
No, Chair.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mark?
No, thank you for that, Chair, and thank you, officers, for the response.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a supplementary, Owen, or not?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, we all are aware of this pandemic and the confusion initially it caused, but the whole idea is to make sure that people suffered less than what they did do. You know, and I think we've maybe achieved something towards that, but it'll all come out in the wash. Okay, can we accept that report, please?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Can I move on to item 11? Compliance with international ordinance standards. Who's taking this one?
You are, Chair.
I am I? Oh, yes, I am. Members will recall that Mazars, as the Council's external auditor, posted some questions to the committee and asked for a response. The attached report contains the answers to those questions, and members are asked to agree the response. If you can remember, some time ago we discussed them. If anyone has any questions or comments, please put or indicate that they would like to speak on this matter. Can I ask them, are members happy with the recommendations of the report and agree the response of Mazars? We all agreed? Thank you. Can we move on to item 12, which is the annual governance statement for the year? And I think, Dave Marshall, you're going to take this.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for that. Dave Marshall, Risk and Governance Manager, Durham County Council. This is the annual governance statement report. And again, I think for members, just to give you a little background about how we come around to this, each year we're asked to do a review of our corporate governance arrangements against the local code of governance that we have agreed. And there's two steps in that. One is we produce a draft report alongside draft statement of accounts, and then we produce a final report with the final statement of accounts. Now, the phrase draft isn't the way that you commonly expect it. It's not just a rough and ready version, if you like. It is literally the final version, and the only change you're going to get is if there's any material changes. I think it's worth pointing out that I think we've never really I think once maybe made a change with a material change due to legislation. But I think inevitably, because of the way things are with COVID and all the things that's been talked about in the meeting earlier, it's a fluid situation, and there may be things that arrive in material changes that will change the report between this version, which is the draft version, and the final version, which will be presented at the September meeting. And I think particularly that could impact if we identify any lessons learned in terms of the improvement actions and things around that. So one of the things, and it was the second page of the report, so what I intend to do, sorry, I wasn't going to go through every page of the report, but I thought I'd bring out some key points in the report and then take any questions from members in that respect. So one of the things on the second page of the report, which is page 168, you'll note that CIPFA gave us guidance nationally in terms of the implications of conducting the annual review, the problems you may have in terms of getting information through AGS, and therefore to make sure that particularly as an audit committee you recognise that there may be not that same full level of assurance of everything that we gathered that we would normally have. What I would say is actually in our case, to be honest, I think apart from the fact we didn't do a final director's assurance statement, which is an internal thing, but all the directors did agree it through CMT, our review was ahead of the game. So to be quite honest, by the time lockdown came in and end of March, it was pretty much all the information had been gathered, and it was just a case of assessing it and going back with queries. So really, I don't think it's had as much of an impact on our AGS review as perhaps it hasn't. So, but again, it's worth noting that there may be things where you couldn't, you may have physically needed to be in a building to get certain evidence or whatever. But really, it's very fringe. in that respect. So I think you can be confident what's in here is everything that is a good level of assurance. So as I've mentioned, there may be some changes between this and the final version, and particularly maybe if there's any lessons that we learn from looking back on how we've dealt with this in terms of governance. Appendix D of the report, and I'll come to that as we move further down, but really what we wanted to highlight there was where we felt that the governance arrangements of the council had demonstrate that the effectiveness of our governance arrangements had helped us meet the coronavirus COVID crisis, and also measures and how that had been demonstrated clearly how we'd sort of managed to see our way through, if you like, react effectively. And Paul touched on just certain things before, but how we've managed to react well, and I think the good governed organisation did that, and I think this demonstrates a lot of the way we dealt with the COVID that we are a well-governed organisation. So I'll come to that as we go through. Paul's mentioned in paragraphs 19 and 20 his audit opinion. He's mentioned his sort of caveat there around his audit opinion in terms of COVID and how that obviously needs to be taken into account. And then at the end of the report, appendices B and C, which we'll go through, but they're basically outlined in Appendix B. It's the actions that we recommended last year, how far we've gone in terms of implementing. There were 9 recommendations last year, 5 have been implemented or substantially implemented, almost complete, and 4 have been carried forward into the actions for the 2021 year. And Appendix D, they're included in Appendix D where there are 5 actions for next year, so 4 carried forward, which we wasn't surprised because there were long-term actions anyhow, and another new action has been brought forward in terms of raising awareness of an improvement of governance over the companies that the council actually runs, separate arms and organisations. So really I didn't want to focus too much on the details, but to give that background, highlight what I thought were the key points, and really was happy to take comments from members, questions from members, and anything that's in there.
Have members got any questions? Yeah. Thanks. John Shuttleworth, please.
Yeah.
Can I bring John? I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
Can I bring John Shuttleworth in, please?
Is that better?
That's it, yeah.
Thank you. Just in relation to Appendix D, point 21, it does make reference to the fact that we made the large payments to the small grants through the COVID-19 hospitality grants. And it says we're going to be, any fraud or error will be underwritten by the Secretary of State. So does that mean if we've made a mistake, any person or organisation has got it, keeps it, and the government just pays the council? Or is that how I read that?
I think Paul Bradley might be best to speak on that one. Paul, I think you're more familiar with that, aren't you?
Are you coming in there, Paul?
I can come in on that, Chair. Yeah, the Secretary of State did write that kind of wording, John. As a council, though, we are active. If we think there's been an error, we have actively pursued to recover it. But ultimately, the Secretary of State did say they would underwrite where the council had made all reasonable steps, that they would stand behind that. Yes.
It's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
I've got no more questions of Dave on this matter. Do we accept the recommendations of the report and approve the draft annual governance statement?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Can we move on to item 13, which is the statement of accounts for the year ended the 31st of March 2020. And can I ask Beverly White to present the report, please? Thank you,
yes,
Beverly.
Thank you, Chair. So this report includes the Council's draft statement of accounts for 2019-20. As members will be aware, there's a 2-stage process for approving and publishing the annual accounts. When we prepared the final accounts timetable, which was approved by this committee back in February, we were aiming to have the accounts approved by the statutory deadlines in place at that time. They were the 31st of May for the draft accounts and the 31st of July for the final or audited accounts. However, in April, the statutory deadlines were changed. The deadlines have been extended for this year only to allow for the anticipated pressure on local authority staff due to COVID-19. So the revised deadlines are the 31st of August for this year to have the draft accounts approved by the responsible financial officer and published on our website, and the 30th of November to have the final audited set of accounts approved by this committee. Now, this committee because it's those charged with governance. So despite the extension to the deadlines, officers were clear from the outset that we wanted to adhere to the agreed timetable as far as practically possible. And I'm pleased to inform you that the Corporate Director of Resources approved the draft accounts on the 12th of June, so well within this year's deadline. The accounts were published on the Council's website later that same day. So due to COVID-19, we didn't receive some information regarding the accounting for Newcastle Airport until the 28th of May, and that's the main reason why we weren't able to achieve the original 31st of May deadline for the draft accounts to be approved. So the Council set of accounts consists of 4 core statements: the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, the movement in reserve statement, the balance sheet and the cash flow statement. And all of the notes to the accounts provide supporting information on figures included within those 4 core statements. In addition, the Council statement of accounts has to include the collection fund accounts, as we are the billing authority, and also the pension fund accounts, as the Council acts as the administering authority for the pension fund. When we prepare the accounts, we closely follow the SIPFA Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting, which dictates the level of information we have to include in the accounts. So as the document's quite lengthy, I don't intend to go through the full statement of accounts with you today, but would like to draw your attention to some of the key information within there. During 2019-20, the general fund balance decreased slightly by £1.2 million, taking it to £23.95 million at the year end. This balance equates to 5.6% of the 2021 net budget requirement, which is within the Council's target of between 5 and 7.5%. The earmarked reserves balance, including skills reserves, reduced by £9.5 million within the year to £217 million. But this reduction would have been £17.5 million more if it weren't for the early receipt of COVID-19 support grant from central government that was received on the 27th of March. The pension fund net assets decreased by £196 million in the year, taking the balance to £2.8 billion. Now that decrease is mainly due to the impact of the financial markets on the fund's investments. There have been no major changes to the way in which we report the accounts this year, but in the narrative report, additional information has been included regarding the impact of COVID-19 on the Council. So this summarises the enormous amount of work that the Council has been doing to support our communities throughout this crisis. Early estimations indicate that government funding may not be sufficient to cover the full impact of COVID-19 on the Council's finances. So we felt it prudent to include a contingent liability in the accounts at year end to cover a potential funding gap between government grant receivable and additional cost pressures due to COVID-19. As you'll know, that COVID-19 led to a sharp decline in air travel at the year end, and this impacted on our valuation of the shareholding we have with Newcastle Airport. It reduced the valuation by a third during the year, taking the valuation at year end down to £7.1 million. However, because we chose to designate this investment as fair value through other comprehensive income, it protects the council taxpayers from movement in the value of shareholdings until such times as they are sold. So the way we deal with that is through an adjustment through the financial instruments, the revaluation reserve, which is an unusable reserve. We've also had to allow for an expected credit loss of £118,000 and a modification loss of £796,000 in the accounts, as we were notified that the airport wouldn't be able to make its loan repayments due to us in the next 2 years. These repayments are, however, expected to be paid to us over the remaining life of the loan. Information regarding the timing of revaluations of our property, plant and equipment, or PPE as we know it for short, is set out in Note 14 of the accounts. These valuations are carried out by our experienced and qualified internal team of valuers who at the year end undertook a review of market conditions. They reviewed land values, building cost indices and rental values using market intelligence, and all with reference to local information. From that review, they concluded that there was no evidence to suggest that there was any impact on the year-end valuations of PPE due to COVID-19. They are, however, closely monitoring the situation, and to date no further information has come to light which they say would alter these valuations. Nothing restricted the valuers in physically assessing assets due to COVID-19, as the valuations were carried out before lockdown. So where are we now? We're currently in the public inspection period for the accounts, which started today and runs up to the 7th of August. Mazar, again, are the council's external auditor, and their audit review is well underway, and they hope to be finished that by the end of August. Any changes required as a result of the audit process will be incorporated into the final set of accounts. There's an audit committee meeting arranged for September, when I hope to be reporting a completed audited set of accounts to you to be approved by yourselves. At the same time, we expect that Mazar will present their audit completion report to members for approval. So I'm happy to take any questions now, but if members think that it would be better to email questions through, if they think of anything between now and in September when they'll be asked to approve the accounts, I'll be happy to respond to any emailed questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. I've got an indication from John Shuttleworth that I'd like to ask a question. John, over to you.
Yes, Chairman. On page 324 of the notes to the accounts, reference is made to Durham County Cricket Club, and within that paragraph it does say that they haven't completed the accounts for last year, and I just wonder why that is, and more so the fact that they made a loss for the year in September 18. Are we likely to get our monies back, and what the point do we need to put this on the risk register?
All right, okay. Their audit year or their financial year ends differently to ours, and that's the reason why we won't have their audited set of accounts yet. But what I can tell you is, we have redeemable preference shares held with the company, and they were converted from a loan that we had with the cricket club. But during 1920, the cricket club managed to repay us £301,000 back. So that reduced the value of the preference shares held on balance sheet. So they did pay us back during the year. And they've got up until the 31st of May 27 to repay the balance of that back to us.
If I can come back, if they made that loss, we're less likely to get that money back, aren't we? Am I correct in saying that?
Chair, if I can come in there, just in turn, I mean, it's not for me to comment at this point on the cricket club's accounts, given they aren't closed yet. In terms of the council's position, I think it is positive to see those payments coming back through or starting to be paid to the council. So I think last time we discussed this, there hadn't been any payments made. We have been talking to the cricket club about this for a number of months. I think it is positive to see the payments coming through, and there are some positive announcements from the cricket club to come going forward, which aren't in the public domain, just in terms of future income streams. So I think in terms of the position with the council, it is positive to see those repayments being made.
Okay, thank you.
Do we not need them on the risk register then, do we?
I think now, sorry, Chair, I think now the payments have started to be made in line with the payment plan, Councillor Shuttleworth. That gives me comfort that the club has started to repay those debenture shares down, which is what the intention was.
Okay, thanks, John. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Ian Rudd.
Oh, hello, Ian, co-opted member. I was just a question for Beverly. I thought the narrative report is actually very useful for the non-technical accountants. But I did have a question on page 9. That's page 217 of the report, and that is showing the original budgets, the revised budgets, and the second part of the lower part of the table shows that the COVID-19 support grant of 17.5 million coming in as a budgeted item, which I thought looked a bit strange because that would have been received very, very late in the day. So I wondered if it would have been better to show it as a variance from the budget, and that would be able to see the other side of the variances as well. Just a thought for Beverly.
Yes, Ian, you're correct. The grant payment of £18.5 million came in on the 27th of March, and because it's a general grant with no specified information on what we had to spend it on, we actually applied £1 million of that in 1920. And what we did was, because it's earmarked for COVID-19 related expenditure, we created an earmarked reserve for the balance of £17.5 million. So we knew exactly what we were going to spend that on in future years. That's what we did. We created an earmarked reserve with the balance that was remaining that we didn't spend in year.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But you showed it was actually a budgeted receipt rather than a variance. That I think that was the question.
Thank you, Ian. Clive, I've got to bring you in.
Thanks, Chair. Clive Robinson, co-opted member. And I've just got a question about schools fund and going forward. We've heard previously that the schools are independent in terms of their accounts and their funding, but that the council is the sort of default liability holder in case there were issues in individual schools. Given obviously the funding challenges that they are experiencing and will further experience going forward, is there any point at which we're getting close to a material liability that the council has to recognise around schools funding?
Are you taking that, Paul, or are you taking that, John?
Yeah, I can take it, Chair. I mean, the position with school reserves is set out in the accounts and in the budget monitoring reports that we preparing. We had a long discussion about this at one of the audit committees, I recall. I don't think anything's changed since we had that discussion in terms of school funding. Certainly we are awaiting, I suppose the same as local government is, what happens next with school funding going forward. So I don't think there's anything to change the position as was previously reported about that being a material item for the accounts, certainly in my view. I don't know if Beverly wants to add anything, but that would be my perspective on it at this point in time.
No,
Have you got any viewpoints, Beverly?
I've got nothing to add to John's comments, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. I know there was some issue in the papers this morning about millions or billions of pounds for schools, and just have to wait and see what that transpires, Clive. See what happens. Okay. I've got no more people wishing to ask any questions. Can we move that, agree the recommendations in the report, please?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Can we move on to item 14, which is the internal audit strategy charter and 6-month internal plan. I think, Paul, you're going to take this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report brings for the committee's approval the internal audit strategy charter and 6-month internal audit plan. The audit strategy and internal audit charter remain largely unchanged since last year. The internal audit plan, members may recall, was presented to the committee in draft at its meeting on the 27th of February, which was, of course, before lockdown. I know we've just previously discussed this. As a result of the rapidly moving picture, I've prepared a 6-month internal audit plan to take us to the end of September and allow us to review that situation again at that time. Members will see in Appendix 4 there are a number of specific COVID-19 reviews that I would like to take place. The table in paragraph 29 shows the high-level analysis of the work and clients that will be completed, where work will be completed up to the 30th of September of this year. Therefore, members are asked to approve the audit strategy, charter and 6-month plan for 2020-2021, with a proposal to bring the plan back to the committee at its meeting in November. That will illustrate the next 6 months through to the end of March. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Have members got any questions of Paul? In that, no.
The report, Chairman.
Move the report, thank you. members are happy with the recommendations and improve the internal audit strategy for the 6-month plan. Can we move on to item 15, which is any other business? I've not been notified of any other business, and therefore I'd like to move on to item 16, which is the exclusion of the public. And at this point, can we agree the resolution to move into Part B? We've got a mover and a seconder for that.
Move it, Chairman.
The seconder. Thank you. Now, what happens now is the IT broadcaster will then join the meeting to confirm that the recording has ended.
Chair, there's a question from Councillor June Clark.
All right. I've just seen that come up, June.
Yeah, sorry about that, Chair, and this is awfully remiss of me, but I was just reminded when we looked at paragraph 20 in that last item that I probably should declare an interest in this item because I am actually a member of Ordin Parish Council who are a customer of our audit team. So I think I'd just like to get that on record before we move into the muted part of the meeting, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. That's great. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you.
You could have put it in later anyway, June, but that's fine. I know what you mean, though. Thanks. Okay. So now waiting for our IT, who's going to take us